You're listening to How to Drink Less, and I'm your host, Adriana Cloud. Whether your goal is to cut back, take a break, or say goodbye to alcohol for good, this podcast will help you stop drinking on autopilot, learn how to manage cravings, and feel fully in control around alcohol. It's easier than you think. Listen on to find out how. Hi everyone, thank you for joining me for another episode of How to Drink Less. I am so glad to have you here with me, and we are going to talk about what it's really like to break up with alcohol if we go from the premise that you do have a relationship with alcohol. Because we do say that. We talk about wanting a different relationship with alcohol or a healthier relationship with alcohol, but we don't actually pause to articulate what that really means. And I think it's worth doing that because it gives us a really good framework for how to decide what we want our relationship with alcohol to actually look like. First of all, what even is a relationship? How do you know you're in a relationship with someone or something? In very basic terms, a relationship is the way in which you're connected to something outside of you. And when it comes to our relationship with people, it includes how we feel towards each other, how we talk to each other, how we behave towards each other. But a relationship doesn't need to be reciprocal. A relationship can also be defined as just your thoughts and feelings about another thing or another person, and they don't even have to know you're thinking about them. I have a relationship with my sister. I love her, I get annoyed by her, I miss her because she lives in another country. We have our video calls and silly text messages and our private jokes and our shared history and other relationships within our family. And I also have a relationship with the musician Andrew Bird, who doesn't know I exist, but I have thoughts about him, and I certainly have feelings about his music. It makes me happy. It makes me want to dance in the kitchen. When I think about playing my favorite songs of his, I feel joyful and excited, and that is my relationship with him. Similarly, I have a relationship with social media, which in my case is a love-hate relationship. Some days there's a lot of swearing. Some days there is a lot of gratitude because social media has brought a lot of amazing people into my life and enabled me to grow my coaching practice and to work with people who are thousands of miles away from me. And yes, I have a relationship with alcohol, even though I have been sober 5 years, and I can't imagine ever wanting to drink again. My relationship with alcohol right now is peaceful. I think and talk a lot about alcohol because that's obviously my job now, but I don't ever miss it and I don't crave it. I'm not scared of it, nor do I blame it for my past behavior, nor do I shame myself for how much I used to drink. I've moved beyond that now. I have closure and I'm at peace with my past drinking. And you have a relationship with alcohol too, no matter how much you currently drink. This is really important to recognize actually, because when it comes to drinking, a lot of people tend to define their relationship just based on quantity. They focus only on how much they drink, but focusing only on the number of drinks you have is a very limiting perspective, and it can be deceiving. If you ask me about my relationship with my sister, and all I told you is how often I talk to her, that might lead you to draw some conclusions, but it definitely doesn't give you the full picture of our relationship. It doesn't tell you how often I think about her or the nature of those thoughts or the topics or tone of our conversations. It doesn't tell you how I feel after our conversations. And it doesn't even tell you whether I look forward to those conversations or dread them. And it's the same with alcohol. How often and how much you drink is information. It's data we can look at and draw conclusions, but it's not the whole picture. It doesn't tell me how much you think about alcohol, how in control you feel around it, or how you feel after drinking, all of which are way more important than how much you drink, at least in my mind. I've met people who have a few drinks every day and don't think too much about alcohol at all. They don't have hangovers. They're among people who also drink regularly, And they don't think they have a problem at all. They're happy with their drinking and don't lie awake at night wishing they could cut back. Their drinking is just a fact of life. And I've met people who are sober or almost completely sober who are still terrified of alcohol because they don't feel in control around it. And they feel they need to constantly monitor themselves and exercise willpower in order to maintain their sobriety. They're afraid to be around alcohol, lest they might succumb to the temptation to drink. They still think about alcohol all the time, even though they're not actively drinking. And some of them spend a lot of time feeling ashamed of their past drinking. And then there's everyone in between. People who sometimes drink, people who sometimes obsess about it, people who go stretches of time feeling in control, and then go back and drink again and start over. The spectrum is super broad and encompasses many different scenarios. But I hope it's clear to you now that how much you drink is only one aspect of your relationship with alcohol. I want you to think about this as you consider what kind of relationship you want to have with alcohol. If you do want to continue drinking, do think about how often and how much you want to drink. If you had a magic wand, what would your drinking look like? Do think about that, but don't stop there. Ask yourself, what kinds of things do you want to depend on alcohol to do for you? Are you okay relying on alcohol to have fun? Are you okay relying on alcohol to make a boring Tuesday evening tolerable? Or are there certain things that you don't want to delegate to alcohol? For example, maybe you don't want to make alcohol solely responsible for your relaxation. Maybe you want to make sure that you have other ways to relax besides drinking. Or maybe you want to develop more emotional resilience, so you decide that you don't want to drink to avoid your feelings. And speaking of feelings, definitely think about how you want to feel in your relationship with alcohol. Or, more to the point, how you don't want to feel. Maybe you don't want to feel out of control. Maybe you don't want to feel dependent. You don't want to feel regretful and like you're not yourself when you drink and do things you regret. What else? What else comes up for you when you consider this question? And because we're talking about relationships, we have to talk about breakups as well. Much like with a human relationship, the longer you've been in the relationship, the harder it seems to remove yourself. This is by evolutionary design, actually. It's how we're built as a species. We're built to choose what's familiar versus what feels good. Your brain doesn't care if you're happy in a relationship. All it cares about is whether you're surviving. And because so far you have survived in this relationship, your brain prioritizes that. The logic goes, we know this is safe, whereas anything new could be really dangerous, so let's just stick with what's familiar, even if it doesn't feel great. This is why people stay for years in jobs they hate. And this is why they stay in relationships that are dull and unfulfilling at best and downright abusive at worst. Because your brain equates familiarity with safety, and safety is king. And this is exactly why people keep drinking for way longer than they want to be drinking, even after they've decided that alcohol is no longer serving them and might even be harming them. Because once again, the brain says, this is not that bad, let's just keep doing what we've always done because it's gotten us this far, right? So why rock the boat? And this is why it's hard for people to change their drinking habits unless there's been a dramatic come to Jesus moment, like a health scare or an ultimatum from a loved one. Unless there's that big thing that jolts you out of inertia, your brain will keep telling you that it's better to just keep drinking. But much like a romantic relationship or a human relationship of any kind, I want you to think about whether it's not that bad or it could be worse is a good enough reason to stay. Change is often uncomfortable, mostly because you're choosing something unfamiliar. You're trying something new, which can be scary. And you might have to work extra hard to remind yourself why you might choose to do something, even if it's scary, even when it's a lot easier to just maintain the status quo. I say this as someone who has stayed in romantic relationships way longer than I should have. So I absolutely get it. At first, I stayed because it wasn't that bad. Then I stayed because what if there wasn't anything better out there? And then, as the relationship kept getting worse and I was becoming more and more unhappy in it, I still stayed because the breakup and the enormity of the consequences felt way too hard. So instead of having the uncomfortable conversations and figuring out the complicated logistics of the breakup, I stayed and continued to feel miserable until I was crying every day for months and felt more and more depressed. Thankfully, at some point, the familiar pain of staying started to seem worse than the new pain of leaving, and I finally decided to do something about it. This was me in a couple of romantic relationships, actually, but it was similar in my relationship with alcohol, too. I waited a long time to do something about my drinking because the idea of quitting felt so much harder than just continuing to drink the way I had been, even though that was making me unwell and making me hate myself, frankly. You might be wondering at this point, how do you know if it's time to break up with alcohol? And of course, there's no one size fits all answer here or a formula I can give you to plug your data into. But here are a few signs that it might be time to reconsider your drinking. You think about alcohol more than you want to. You don't trust yourself to stop once you start. You keep making promises to yourself about changing your drinking, but you end up breaking those promises. Or you feel regret, shame, or disappointment after drinking. None of these mean you have a problem or you have to quit forever. But they do mean the relationship might not be working the way you want it to. And the sooner you get honest with yourself about that, the sooner you can be on the path to feeling better. And conversely, a good relationship with alcohol looks differently for different people too. But here's what it means to me. A healthy relationship with alcohol feels calm. It's not something you're constantly negotiating about or thinking about. It doesn't give you anxiety and it doesn't take up mental space. It doesn't create drama and it doesn't make you feel bad about yourself or create conflict with other people in your life. I want to say here for the record that you can want to end or change the terms of your relationship with someone or something, even if the relationship hasn't completely soured and even if you're not in pain. I cannot emphasize this enough. There need be no betrayal or huge fallout or rock bottom. You can simply decide one day that you want something different, and that's enough of a reason to make a change. In fact, you can love the other person dearly and still decide that you no longer want to be with them. You're allowed to want something different, even if nothing has gone horribly wrong, okay? You're allowed to change your mind and to want to experiment and try something new. We often think we need a good enough reason to end a relationship, but what does that even mean? What's good enough? There's no universally agreed upon definition of what a good reason is. You get to decide that for yourself. And I don't want to minimize the effort it might take to break up a relationship, whether it's with your long-term partner or with your favorite brand of gin. In a romantic relationship, you have to navigate all the logistics of who lives where after the breakup if you'd been living together. How do you continue to raise your kids together if you have kids? Who gets the car? Who gets the fun friends? And underneath the practicality of these changes is all the emotional pain a breakup entails. Because you're not just saying goodbye to the person you're breaking up with. You're also potentially saying goodbye to other people. And you're for sure saying goodbye to the version of you were with them. And you're saying goodbye to a future together and to a life you won't get to live now. And no matter how dysfunctional or hurtful the relationship may have gotten towards the end, it's important to acknowledge the loss and to not try to gaslight yourself into feeling good about it. You can know that it's the right choice to remove someone from your life, and you can still feel sad about it and grieve the loss. And similarly, you don't have to pretend there weren't any good moments in the relationship just because the tide has turned at some point and there wasn't much good to hold on to at the end. you can still celebrate and be grateful for the good moments from the past. And again, it's the same with alcohol. You can be fully on board as to why it's a great idea to quit, and you can acknowledge all the negative effects of alcohol in your life. And even so, you're still allowed to grieve the loss because you're losing a version of you. Odds are that change might be the catalyst, allowing you to become a stronger, happier, and more badass version of you. But that doesn't erase the fact that there is an identity loss when you quit drinking. And here, too, it's okay to acknowledge that your relationship with alcohol wasn't all bad. You're allowed to remember there were some good moments, too, without romanticizing them and idealizing them through nostalgia goggles. You can acknowledge alcohol had its fun moments. And then remind yourself why you're choosing to remove it from your life anyway. Because it wasn't only fun. And it's important to tell yourself that truth as well. I don't want to belabor the comparison anymore because I'm sure you see the parallels, but I do think it's worth to consider quitting drinking or cutting back from the perspective of a relationship because it normalizes any hesitation you might have. When you think about breaking up with someone, you also think about the other people in your life you might lose, like mutual friends or the family of the other person. Or maybe even if you don't lose everyone completely, the dynamics of some relationships will change for sure. There's no way around that. And when you consider quitting drinking, you might understandably worry how that will affect your existing relationships once alcohol is no longer part of the mix. But if a relationship requires alcohol to function, I want you to seriously think about whether that's the kind of relationship you want to keep and to keep investing time in. If you can't show up as yourself, but you have to be buzzed or drunk to have something in common with the other person, is that what you want? I know it's not an easy decision, but after the main breakup, whether it's with a romantic partner or with alcohol, you might have to reevaluate other relationships too and decide which of them might need adjustments as well. And finally, I want to speak to how it feels after you end a relationship. We get this idea that if I'm the one who chose to end the relationship, I'm not allowed to miss the other person and I'm only supposed to feel good about the change. That's nonsense. It's okay to miss the other person, especially in the beginning as you learn how to do things alone that you used to do with them. And it's okay to remember the good times you had together. It's okay if you find yourself missing alcohol too. Doesn't mean you lack willpower or there's something wrong with you. It's completely normal to miss something that has been a part of your life for years. In fact, it would be weird if you didn't miss it. But I hear this from people all the time. They start judging and shaming themselves for missing alcohol. I should know better, they say. Alcohol has done so much damage. How could I miss it at all? I shouldn't miss it. I shouldn't even be thinking about it. But the fact that alcohol has done damage doesn't erase the fact that it's what you were used to doing for years and years. So be kind to yourself. And think about past relationships that have ended and how things unfolded after the breakup. Even if you initially missed someone, eventually you moved on and learned to get on with your life without them. And one day you look back and you think, why was I even with that person? What was I thinking? I'm so glad the relationship ended. Because we change and we outgrow relationships all the time. And just like you might look back on that person you dated in your 20s and realize you have zero desire to be with them now, and in fact, you don't even want to see them again or talk to them ever again, the same thing can happen with alcohol. Even if right now you might struggle to imagine your life without it, I promise you it's possible to completely get over it and to live happily ever after. That's how I am with alcohol these days. I really cannot imagine a scenario where I might be tempted to drink again. I'm mostly like you, no thank you, not for me. Which is how I feel about things like licorice too. No thank you, not for me. And I can help you get there too. Because what most people don't realize is that you can teach yourself not to want alcohol. You weren't born wanting to drink. You learned to love alcohol. And you can learn how not to love it too and how not to miss it. And I would love to help you. I'm teaching a free class this week on 2 different days and at different times, and that's exactly the topic of the class: how to never want alcohol again. I'll tell you the exact things you need to work on so that you not only quit drinking, but you do get closure and you do get to live happily ever after. I'll put the link for the class in the show notes, and I would love to see you there. And if this episode resonated, please take a few minutes to rate and review the podcast. It makes a huge difference for discoverability, and I'd be very grateful. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I'll speak to you soon. If you're looking for practical advice for how to say no to alcohol and say yes to yourself, you will want to get on my email list. Sign up to receive my free guide with 7 steps to kickstart your sobriety. The link is in the show notes, so go and grab it now, and I'll see you soon in your inbox.